Counter-terrorism course for government officials has called Douglas Murray and others far right and even discussed how he should be deplatformed on social media. Joining me now to discuss this live from the West Bank is who other than author Douglas Murray. Good afternoon to you, Douglas.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thank you very much for joining us. I have to say, I found this absolutely extraordinary when I saw this. This is a first-person piece written by basically a former British civil servant who got sent on this course and was quite, I think, befuddled by what was being talked about on this course because it was absolutely extraordinary. It was a King's College counter-terrorism course for UK civil servants, organised by the Centre for Defence Studies, designed for civil servants and professionals in counter-terrorism. And attending were staff from the Foreign Office, the Justice Ministry, Ministry of Defence and the Home Office. And facilitating this was senior lecturers from the Security Studies Department. You'd think pretty sensible people dealing with pretty important stuff, life and death stuff. A lot of their stuff was talking about postmodern identity politics. They described terrorists as, one man's freedom fighter. Even when talking about whether or not there should be a judgment, any subjective thought on whether or not it was reasonable to call some people, like Hamas, freedom fighters, that was kind of poo-pooed away. They talked about social media, and that's where you came up. And the lecturer argued that Douglas Murray and Joe Rogan, a man I know you know as well, are both examples of the far right, and said, to what extent should Joe Rogan and Douglas Murray be suppressed? They have millions of followers. To deplatform them would cause issues, but society needs to find other ways to suppress them. Your response to that, Douglas?
First of all, the lecturer in question is somebody called Peter Newman. He is employed by King's College London. King's College London, incidentally, has taken tens of millions of pounds of funding in recent years from the government of Qatar, who, of course, are currently playing host to the leadership of the terrorist group Hamas. So I think there are a lot of questions that King's College London needs to answer about its funding and its connections to the terror-sponsoring state of Qatar. This particular man, Peter Newman, first of all, in front of these civil servants who were all there, paid for, Julia, by you, me, and all of the people watching. They were all there on the taxpayer dime, and the civils. No, they weren't doing their day jobs. They were meant to be being educated on counter-extremism. And Peter Newman, among other things, used the opportunity to defame and slander the government's own independent reviewer into the Prevent Counter-Terrorism Strategy, William Shawcross. William Shawcross was appointed by the Home Secretary, and Home Office officials were sent on a taxpayer-funded course where Peter Newman told them all of these lies and slanders about the government's own appointee to look into terrorism legislation. So that is the first thing, and I would call on the Home Secretary to make an urgent inquiry into this matter, because the fact that William Shawcross, the independent reviewer into the Prevent Counter-Terrorism Strategy, should have been slandered by Peter Newman of King's College London to Home Office officials is a scandal and requires very urgent intervention by the Home Secretary and others. As for myself and Joe Rogan, yes, it seems that this same man, Peter Newman, was asked, what can we do to counter these terrifying views that Joe Rogan and Douglas Murray espouse? Because, of course, Joe Rogan and I are such incredibly fringe figures, as you know, Julia. I mean, it's far, far to the fringes of any reasonable politics. And this man, Peter Newman, very sinisterly said, we will have to find other ways to suppress them. Now, given that he had already been asked, how do we suppress them on social media when they have such big platforms, Joe Rogan and Douglas Murray, he then says, society will have to find other ways to suppress them. I would like King's College London to carry out an urgent review, and I would like them to suspend Peter Newman, the man in question, until we find out exactly why he was doing this, what he meant by it. It's deeply sinister. I've got my lawyers looking into this already.
Good.
I would like the government to look into it. I'd like King's College London to look into it. But one other thing, Julia, none of your viewers will be surprised to hear that the man in question, Peter Newman, was exposed a number of years ago for lying about the government minister Michael Gove. Peter Newman was a fanatical anti-Brexiteer, and he lied about something that Michael Gove said at the German embassy.
Sorry.
Yeah. I know. Imagine, Julia, the same person who's saying all these things about counter-terrorism that are such palpable nonsense also turns out to hate the way in which the majority of the British public voted in 2016, can't let go of it, and uses taxpayer-funded courses to try to get his revenge.
But this is the real worry. As you say, we're paying for people like him, and again, working for a university. And again, I think we all need to be concerned about how the money from China and some very questionable Middle Eastern states is now basically, should we say, guiding a lot of the thought at our universities these days in the UK and in the US and elsewhere. But it's being taxpayers' money, and staff who should be doing their job are now on these courses. And what amazed this civil servant, Anne Stanley, who's reported on this, I don't know if this is her real name. I think it is. I mean, all credit to her if she is speaking out. But she was really quite shocked. She said she was depressing, and how they were basically delivering this very politically biased, very sort of anti-government training.
Yes.
And the reality is, this is all over the place. It's happening in our schools, it's happening in our universities, it's happening in business, it's happening in public sector, where we've got these sort of outside bodies coming in and being paid by the taxpayer to basically criticise every single one of the sort of our values, the way we think, the way we run, the history of this country, the government. I mean, I'm all for holding power to account always, but the political bias is extraordinary, and it seemed to go unquestioned, she says, by everyone on the course.
Exactly. It goes unquestioned, and it's this unholy alliance of elements within the civil service who, oppose certain government policies, think that government policy is simply the government's view as opposed to something they're actually meant to enact. And the alliance of people like that with these sorts of, frankly, very, very fringe figures who've never produced any serious or interesting academic work, who sort of glide through careers in the background, like this man Newman, and they really are carrying out campaigns, not just against people like me or people like Joe Rogan. We're big enough to be able to stand up for ourselves, but against government-appointed advisors, government-appointed figures, against government ministers, government advice. The government actually has had very clear advice on counter-terrorism strategy for the last 13 years, and under the previous Labour government, it has to be said. But there are civil servants and academics who are doing their damnedest, and have done for years, to try to subvert government counter-terrorism policy. They don't want to talk about the Islamist threat. They don't want to talk about the terrorists of Hamas or anything like that, including the terrorists of Hamas who live in the UK. They want to talk about this bogeyman far-right thing. And you know what the problem with this is? This German academic Newman, he should actually realize, among other things, something very serious, which is the term far-right shouldn't be thrown around.
No, exactly.
There are far-right movements across across Europe, significantly, of course, in Germany and elsewhere. We don't have really a far-right problem in the UK. The BNP was seen off years ago, but we should be alert to it. We should be, aware when actual far-right people and fascists try to muscle in. But to call people like Joe Rogan and me far-right is just so preposterous that it makes nothing have any meaning.
Exactly. I mean,
as I say, it's highly defamatory, but,
Now, I get called it all the time as well. I was like, what do you actually mean? Do you know what those words actually mean? Are they going to be able to deplatform?
You've always, Julia, you have always struck me as a jack-booted far-right extremist. I mean, I've always thought that, really.
Don't say that. People will clip it and put it out.
You see me,
Yeah, but that's the thing. Are we going to be able to suppress and deplatform you? Is that ever going to happen, do you think? Because you've actually talked about in the past how some of the things you say and some of the things you write, you sell your books are bestsellers, publishers are going to still want to publish you, people want to read you, they want to hear your views, that you will not shut up even though people, and they do try and censor you.
No, I mean, I wouldn't. But there's two things that are serious about this. One is, I think that for people who don't have the platforms that I have and the voice I'm lucky enough to have, I think that this sort of thing is profoundly intimidating. I think that's what the King's College London course was trying to do, was to try to intimidate civil servants and others into thinking that there's a very narrow range of opinion that's permissible, and it happens to be their opinion. But the second thing is, again, I come back to this thing. What does Peter Newman mean when he says that Joe Rogan and I, that society has to find other ways to suppress us?
Very sinister.
If it's not to be kicked off social media or the media, what is it? I think it's a very clear implicit threat. I would say that makes him somebody beyond the pale of politics. Normally, people who talk about the suppression of people in society are what we used to call far right. It's a deeply fascistic thing to say.
Exactly.
So I'm very interested, as so often, Julia, what they call us is what they are.